Okay, welcome back, everyone. So today's screencast is going to focus a little bit more on slavery. We started slavery in class, but we're going to kind of jump into it a little bit more in depth here with our screencast, and we're going to continue it next week on Monday and Tuesday. So today's screencast is really just going to focus on slavery in regards to politics and a little bit more on economic growth of slavery. So in class on Friday, we really kind of talked about how the North is kind of completely getting rid of slavery with gradual emancipation. And then in really the South, it's a story of two different regions. You have the Upper South, where slavery is actually declining, and then the Lower South, where it's really kind of just taking root and almost taking complete control over lifestyle, economy, culture, all different aspects of the Lower South. So what we're going to start with today is slavery and politics. So there's a couple different things that we need to be aware of here. So the first thing is something that we've talked about in our class already, but we're going to continue to talk about it. As the United States expands territorially, first with the Louisiana Purchase, and then later with the Mexican Cession, and the land that we get from Britain up in Oregon, and when we acquire Texas as well, slavery is going to become a major issue. And it becomes a major issue as far as political power is concerned. So what we have to do is look at this in a sectional way. So when you look at the South is very concerned about keeping equality in the Senate, specifically in the Senate. They want slave states to remain equal to free states. And I think most of you guys kind of understand this whole concept here. In order for a bill to become a law in the United States, it has to pass both houses of Congress. And so if they can at least retain equality in the Senate, they can kind of stop any legislation that's going to kind of prohibit slavery or even limit slavery. And so it's something that they really want to fight strong for. And so this is something important to understand. As the country expands, those entrenched slave states, those slave states that are already in the Union, so we're talking about both the Upper South and the Lower South here, they're going to fight to kind of have slavery extended into these new areas of the country. And the big reason here, yes, it's economic, but it's also political power, and you have to understand that. They're worried about becoming a minority within the country, a minority section within the country, and they already see kind of their power declining, and so they want to keep extending it, and the only way to do that is to make at least some of the new states that are going to come into the country from these new territories, at least some of them to be slave states, or at least open to slavery. So that's the big issue here politically. Now, the reason they have to fight so hard for this, if you take a look at this map here, this gives you a good idea. This is showing you population. So the darker the color here is the more concentrated of population. So if you look at like the blue color or that like orangey color, what you notice here is that the high concentrations of populations in the United States, going from the 1820s up to the 1850s and 60s, it's going to be concentrated in the north, really specifically the northeast and then some of the Great Lakes regions. But if you look at it, there's very, very few high concentrations of population in the South, either the Upper South or the Lower South. And so what this means for us politically is that the House of Representatives is going to be a losing battle for the South. More and more representatives are going to be from the North, and less are going to be from the South. And so that means that they basically lost that House of Congress. By the 1840s and 1850s, that is really a Northern House of Congress, because they're just going to have bigger populations up in the North. And so the Southerners are increasingly going to be concerned with the Senate and increasingly concerned with kind of keeping equality of states. Now, kind of in another aspect of politics, not just kind of like balance of power as far as states are concerned, what we have to understand here is there's two major things going on here in the time period. Yes, you have a sectional battle happening between southern states, primarily defined by states that have slaves, and northern states, states that do not have slaves. But there's something else that's going on here. In the 1830s, late 1820s and 1830s, what's going to develop is our second party system. So we talked about our first party system, which was the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists. The second party system begins with kind of Andrew Jackson and the creation of the Democratic Party, but we also talked about the opposition party that's going to show up, which is the Whig Party. Now, these political parties, as we discussed, are not sectional parties. So it's not a Southern party or a Northern party. They're national parties. So the Democratic Party has Northern Democrats and they have Southern Democrats. The Whig Party is going to have Northern Whigs and Southern Whigs. And so what this means is that slavery could potentially be a very, very divisive issue. And if you want to have a national political party, you have to do something about this issue of slavery, because this could split the party in half. And it's going to split parties in half when we get to the elections of like 1856 and 1860. It's going to kind of really divide up the party, Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats. And so Democrats kind of realized this. In the 1830s, they realized that potentially slavery could destroy their political party, and any type of power across sectional lines would be completely eliminated. So what's going to happen is the Democrats, mostly using Northern Democrats to kind of get this passed, surprisingly, they're going to pass this rule in Congress, which becomes known as the gag rule. And so what this means basically is that anytime anybody presents a bill in Congress that talks about prohibiting slavery or abolishing slavery, what's going to happen is that it's going to get automatically tabled. And what that means is that when you table a bill, it means that you don't even vote on it. It just kind of gets put aside, and it doesn't even get voted on. And so they actually put this rule into place in Congress. So anytime anybody brought up any issue as far as slavery was concerned, it was just kind of put aside and not even discussed. And so as far as we're concerned, this is going to be important because it kind of basically just lets the tension build and build and build surrounding slavery. And the other issue here is that since the Democratic Party is behind this whole idea of the gag rule, they're going to be increasingly seen as the party that is kind of favoring slavery in a large sense. Even though majority of Democrats, there are a large percentage of Democrats who are Northern, basically they're seen as kind of almost catering to their Southern counterparts because of things like the gag rule and other aspects that we're going to talk about later in our class when the sectional crisis kind of gets worse. But the Whigs try and do a similar thing, because it's not just the Democrats. Although the Democrats come up with the gag rule, the Whigs try and do a very similar thing, because again, if you let slavery kind of creep in, it's going to destroy your political party here. And if you look at this picture, this is kind of just exactly what they're doing here. Basically, slavery is out there. It's a potentially explosive issue, and they basically just don't want to deal with it, because sometimes politicians deal with power in the moment and not kind of long-term picture. And so that's really what they're doing here with the gag rule. And when you look at it, we're going to see a lot of third parties start to creep into American history at this point, like in the 1840s and 1850s. Some of them like the Know Nothing Party, and the Anti-Mason Party, and the Free Soil Party. Well, the Free Soil Party addresses slavery, but most of the other ones try to completely avoid the issue because they know that kind of bringing in slavery could potentially just wipe out your political party completely. Okay, so the next big thing that we want to talk about is just slavery and kind of economic growth. So we really talked about this in class a little bit, and kind of how cotton really grabbed the hold of the Lower South's economy almost completely, but we didn't get a chance to really kind of dive into it too much, so I want to talk a little bit more in depth. So what I would do actually is just pause the video here and kind of just take a look at some of the different regions of the country and kind of see what industry is important to them, and really kind of note the differences between the North, the Upper South, and the Lower South here, and kind of how industry kind of just dissipates as you go further south into the Union. And it really kind of shows you the characteristics of the two different regions economically. And when we say when I say growth, it's not only as far as what types of industries they're going into, but also kind of just growth as far as people in the regions and where do they live and why do they live where they live. So when you take a look at this map here, there's a couple of different things I want you to take a look at. So first it's showing you like big roads and canals. So first thing that should jump out to you comparing regions, south and north, is that the north has a lot more canals out there, a lot more roads, than the South does. But the other big thing that you want to kind of pay attention to is where are the locations of their cities and what types of cities are they? So in the South, what you see is that most big cities, if you ever want to call them big cities, are located either on the coast, the traditional coastal cities like port cities, like Charleston or Savannah or New Orleans, or they're located along rivers because primarily they're going to traffic their goods along rivers in the South. In the North as well, but they're also going to increasingly develop railroads in the North. So that's one thing that you want to kind of keep in mind. The North is going to develop a lot of new cities at the time. There's going to be an explosion of new cities happening in the North. And in the South, there are a few manufacturing cities like St. Louis, mostly in the upper South, but for the most part, they're staying more with kind of coastal cities and cities along big rivers. Now, this map I think really kind of tells you a lot. This is showing you railroads developed by the 1850s in the South and the North. And there's a couple of different things that you want to notice here as well. So number one, there's not much railroad activity in the South at all, upper South or lower South in 1850. And if you look at the North has an explosion of railroads kind of happening all over. And this kind of facilitates a lot of different things. Railroads means, it's an industry in and of itself, but it's also connecting different parts of the country. And that's something I want you guys to be really aware of. The connection between different parts of the country and the connection of the economies. So we touched on this on Friday in class, that the South does have a connection with the North as far as shipping cotton up north for textile mills. But increasingly what's going to happen, if you look at this map, and you look at this one, really shows it to you, because on this second map, on the right, it shows you railroads by the 1860s. And what you should notice is not just that there's more railroads in the North, but how do the railroads run? And if you really look at it, there is basically no railroads that go north-south. All the railroads are going east-west, and it's kind of blanketing the whole northern part of the country. And the South is really, it's got a couple, but not a lot. And so there's really going to start to be a connection between the North and the West, economically speaking, because goods are going to be shipped along these railroads and along these canals, and they start to become more intertwined as a region. And when you see different regions start to become more economically intertwined, that's also going to kind of facilitate them to be more politically intertwined. And so the South, again, kind of sees this connection with their politics. And if the West is being more connected to the North, there's increasingly a bigger and bigger West in America. It's them losing their political power. And that's what kind of gets them nervous. That's what kind of makes them cling to slavery so fervently. It's the economic core of it, that it's kind of a huge part of their economy, like we discussed in class, but it's also the fact that they see their political power kind of just falling by the wayside. And once they lose their political power in the Union, basically they become a region that is kind of just there along for the ride and can't really influence the government in any significant way. So we're going to pick up on Monday with kind of more social aspects of slavery. What was social life like for the slaves in the lower South and the upper South, and then also kind of like society of the South in general, and how race and slavery kind of really also kind of entrenched this institution, and really another reason for why the South kind of clings to slavery and really fights any kind of movement to abolish it or to prohibit it in the new territories that we acquire. Alright, so enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will see you guys on